Millionaire orders a dress for his mother, but he didn't expect to fall in love with the young seamstress. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We continue. The morning. Sun filtered through the lace curtain slits, casting delicate shadows on the navy blue fabric stretched across the sewing table. Emily passed her fingers gently over the satin surface, feeling each fiber as if she could read a story through touch. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the characteristic smell of new fabrics, creating a welcoming atmosphere in the small makeshift studio in the living room of her home in Fairview. In the armchair by the window, Grandma Rose was knitting with the same dedication as always, though her hands were no longer as steady as before. The rhythmic tinkling of knitting needles was like an old lullaby, familiar and comforting. Emily raised her eyes from her work for a moment, observing the serene expression on her grandmother's face, and an involuntary smile appeared on her lips. "Grandma, do you think I should use the shadow stitch on this trim?" asked Emily, holding the fabric up to the light. Her grandmother adjusted her glasses and leaned slightly forward, examining the work with experienced eyes. "The shadow stitch will give the piece more personality, dear. Remember what I always say? Each stitch tells a story," replied Grandma Rose, her voice carrying the wisdom of decades dedicated to sewing. Emily nodded, turning her attention back to her work. Her hands moved with precision while the needle danced through the fabric, creating patterns invisible to less trained eyes. Each dress she produced carried a bit of her soul, the stories her grandmother had told her, the afternoons spent watching her work when she was just a little girl. The clock on the wall struck 8 when Emily began organizing her pieces for the fair. It was Saturday, the day to display her work in the central square of Fairview. As she carefully folded each creation, she thought about how her life had transformed in recent years. From apprentice to provider, she had taken on not just the craft, but also the responsibility of caring for her grandmother and maintaining the house. "Today will be a special day," murmured Grandma Rose, with that peculiar gleam in her eye that always intrigued Emily. It was as if her grandmother could see beyond the present, as if the threads of destiny were as visible to her as the balls of yarn in her basket. "Why do you say that, Grandma?" asked Emily, curious as she stored the last piece in her work case. Grandma Rose just smiled, that enigmatic smile that held secrets of a lifetime. "Sometimes, my dear, destiny is like a well-made seam. Each stitch leads us exactly where we need to be." Emily adjusted the shawl on her grandmother's shoulders and kissed her forehead before leaving. The sun was already higher, and the gentle autumn breeze carried the scent of flowers from the garden. As she walked toward the square, her creations carefully wrapped in her arms, she couldn't imagine that this would truly be a day different from all others, a day when the first stitch of a new story would begin to be embroidered. The Fairview. Fair was already in full swing when Emily finished setting up her small booth. Her pieces, carefully arranged on white lace tablecloths, attracted admiring glances from passing people. The aroma of fresh bread from the neighboring bakery mingled with the perfume of flowers that Mary, the florist, sold at the stall next door, creating an atmosphere that only a small-town fair could provide. Emily was adjusting the drape of a moss-green dress when she noticed a different presence. A tall man, wearing a well-tailored suit that stood out from the unpretentious environment of the fair, was carefully observing her creations. There was something in his gaze that intrigued her. It wasn't the usual interest of a common customer, but a mixture of curiosity and recognition, as if looking for something beyond the pieces themselves. "This finishing," he murmured, lightly touching the hem of a navy blue dress. "I haven't seen work like this in years." Emily felt a slight tremor in her hands, but maintained her composure. "It's a traditional stitch that I learned from my grandmother," she explained, observing how his fingers traced the path of the embroidery with uncommon knowledge. "My name is Richard Morgan," he introduced himself, extending his hand. "And that stitch, it's exactly like the ones I used to see in the old pieces from Morgan Textiles." Emily's heart accelerated at the recognition of the name of the largest textile company in the region. Her grandmother used to mention this company in her stories, always with a distant look that Emily had never completely understood. "You know Morgan Textiles?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. An enigmatic smile appeared on Richard's lips. "You could say that. Actually, I'm the current heir to the company." He paused, his eyes fixed on Emily's work. "And I'm looking for someone with your skills for a special project." Emily felt the world spin slightly. The heir of Morgan Textiles there at her small booth? Before she could fully process the information, he continued. "My mother turns 70 next month, and I want to gift her with something unique. Something that reminds her of the company's early days, when each piece was made with this kind of care and dedication." He took a business card from his suit pocket and handed it to Emily. "I'd like you to create a dress for her. Something that combines the tradition I see in your work with the elegance that such an occasion demands." Emily held the card between her trembling fingers, feeling the embossed golden letters under her touch. Her grandmother's words from that morning echoed in her mind. "Today will be a special day." She began, her voice faltering slightly. "It's a great responsibility." "That's exactly why it needs to be you," Richard replied with a conviction that surprised her. "There's something in your work that reminds me of a time when Morgan Textiles was more than just a company. It was a family of artisans." A sudden breeze blew through the square, making the lace in her booth dance gently. Emily looked again at the card in her hands, feeling that she was standing before a door that could change her life forever. What would her grandmother say about this? Why was her heart beating so fast at this proposal? That night, as the moon poured its silvery light over Fairview, Emily couldn't sleep. Richard Morgan's business card rested on her sewing table, the golden letters glinting under the nightlight. Her thoughts oscillated between the excitement of the opportunity and an inexplicable nervousness she couldn't explain. In the living room, she found her grandmother still awake, knitting by the light of the small lamp. There was something different in her expression when Emily sat beside her on the old sofa. "Grandma, something strange happened at the fair today," Emily began, noticing how Grandma Rose's hands paused for a moment. "A man from Morgan Textiles ordered a dress from me. Actually, he's not just any man. He's the heir to the company." The silence that followed weighed more than any words. Grandma Rose placed the knitting in her lap, her eyes fixed on a distant point, as if observing a scene from many years ago. "Richard Morgan," murmured the elderly woman, surprising Emily. "August's grandson." "You know him?" asked Emily, feeling her heart race. Grandma Rose slowly stood up and walked to the old wooden chest she kept in the corner of the room. With trembling hands, she opened the lid and removed a faded navy blue velvet box. Emily approached, curious, as her grandmother removed yellowed photographs and newspaper clippings. "Your grandfather, my Anthony, wasn't just a tailor, Emily," began Grandma Rose, her voice filled with emotion. "He was one of the first designers at Morgan Textiles. He and August Morgan were like brothers, sharing the same dreams of creating a brand that would value Brazilian artisanal work." Emily picked up one of the photographs, where two young men smiled in front of a small shop. One was her grandfather, whom she knew only from other photos, and the other must have been August Morgan. Richard's smile, she now realized, was identical to his grandfather's. "What happened?" asked Emily, sensing there was much more to this story. Grandma Rose's eyes welled up. "There was a dispute. A collection your grandfather created. Someone in the company accused him of copying the designs. August was traveling at the time and the other directors." Her voice failed. "Your grandfather was removed, and the dream they shared began to unravel." Emily sat beside her grandmother, holding her wrinkled hands. "Why did you never tell me this before? Some stories are like delicate fabrics, my dear. They need the right moment to be unfolded." Grandma Rose picked up another photograph, where an elegant woman wore a stunning party dress. "This is Aurora Morgan, Richard's mother. Your grandfather designed this dress for her wedding." Emily observed the photo with renewed attention, recognizing the same stitches and finishes that her grandmother had taught her. Suddenly, Richard's visit took on a new meaning. It wasn't just an order. It was a thread of destiny intertwining two families that time had separated. The next morning, The Morgan Textiles office seemed even more imposing than Emily had imagined. The historic building, with its large windows and Art Deco details, silently told the story of decades of textile tradition. Adjusting the folder that carried her preliminary designs, Emily took a deep breath before crossing the revolving doors. The receptionist led her through corridors, decorated with old photographs of the company. Emily couldn't help but look in each one for traces of the history her grandmother had revealed the night before. In one of the images, she recognized her grandfather, young and smiling, beside a cutting table. Richard was waiting for her in his office, the morning light streaming through the large windows and creating patterns on the old wooden floor. Seeing her, his face lit up with a smile that made Emily's heart skip a small beat. "I'm glad you accepted my invitation," he said, indicating a chair. "Did you bring some ideas?" Emily opened her folder, revealing the sketches she had spent the night developing. Her hands trembled slightly as she explained each detail, each choice of fabric and finishing. Richard listened with genuine attention, his eyes alternating between the drawings and Emily's animated face. "This stitch here," she explained, indicating a detail in the drawing, "is the same one my grandmother—" Her voice faltered, unsure if she should mention the past. Richard leaned forward, his eyes meeting hers. "The same one your grandmother learned from your grandfather, Anthony Rivers, isn't it?" Emily felt the air escape from her lungs. "You knew." "Please, call me Richard," he smiled. "And yes, I knew. In fact, that's why I went to the fair. When I saw your pieces on display, I immediately recognized the style, the finishes. It was like seeing your grandfather's work reborn through your hands." A silence charged with emotion filled the environment. Emily felt her heart beating strongly, while Richard stood up and walked to an old cabinet in the corner of the room. From there, he removed a worn leather folder. "These are your grandfather's original designs," he explained, placing the folder on the table with reverence. "My grandfather kept them all these years, waiting for the right moment to correct a mistake from the past." Emily opened the folder with trembling hands, discovering dozens of meticulously elaborated designs, some with annotations in the margins made in the handwriting she recognized from her grandfather's old letters. It was like finding a long-lost treasure. "The dress I want for my mother," continued Richard, his voice soft, "is not just a birthday present. It's a way to reconnect the present with a past that should never have been forgotten." Their gazes met again, and Emily felt something different born in that moment. Not just the emotion of discovery, but also an inexplicable warmth that spread through her chest. The office seemed more welcoming now, as if the old walls were silent witnesses to a new chapter that was beginning to be written. The weeks that followed transformed Emily's routine. Her mornings, previously dedicated only to orders from the fair, now were divided between her usual work and the special dress for Aurora Morgan. The chosen fabric, an Italian silk in a deep night blue shade, rested on her work table like a silent promise. On one of these mornings, while carefully measuring the fabric, Emily heard the doorbell ring. Her heart raced as she recognized Richard, who had begun to make regular visits to check on the progress of the dress. He carried with him an old wooden box. "I found something that might interest you," he said, placing the box on the table. Upon opening it, he revealed a set of old sewing tools. "They were your grandfather's. My grandfather kept them all these years." Emily picked up a bronze pair of scissors, his initials AR delicately engraved on the side. The cold metal in E. Her hands seemed to pulse with memories of a time she had never known. Grandma Rose, who was watching from her usual armchair, let out an emotional sigh. "Anthony always said that a good pair of scissors was like an extension of the tailor's soul," commented the elderly woman, her eyes shining with contained tears. Richard approached Grandma Rose's armchair, sitting on the small stool nearby. "My grandfather used to tell me stories about the early days of the textile company. He talked about how your husband had a special gift for understanding fabrics, as if he could hear what they wanted to become." The afternoon progressed between stories and memories. Emily observed, with a tightness in her chest, how Richard listened to her grandmother with genuine interest, asking questions about the old days and sharing his own family memories. There was a gentleness in his manner that contrasted with the image she had built of a textile business executive. While working on the dress, Emily felt the weight of history in her hands. Each stitch she made was like a link connecting past and present. Richard occasionally approached, observing her work with a look that mixed professional admiration and something more, something she dared not name. "You know," he said at one point, "the company lost a lot when it moved away from this type of artisanal work. We became efficient, modern, but lost the soul that was in each piece." Emily raised her eyes from her work, meeting Richard's intense gaze. "Sometimes we need to take a few steps back to find the right path," she replied, surprising herself with her own boldness. A soft smile appeared on his lips. "Exactly. And sometimes we need someone to show us that path." The afternoon sun came through the window, creating a play of light and shadow on the blue fabric. Emily felt her face warm under Richard's gaze, while her hands continued the delicate work. In the corner of the room, Grandma Rose observed the scene with a knowing smile, as if she could see the invisible threads of destiny intertwining before her eyes. News of the collaboration between Emily and Morgan Textiles didn't take long to spread through Fairview. At Saturday's fair, her booth attracted curious glances and whispered comments. Among the visitors was Paul, her childhood friend, who had recently arrived from Boston after years of absence. "So the rumors are true," he said, examining one of the exhibited pieces. Little Emily conquering high society. There was a tone in his voice that she couldn't decipher, pride mixed with something more. "It's not quite like that, Paul," she replied, nervously adjusting one of the pieces. "It's just a job like any other." "Like any other," he laughed, leaning over the improvised counter. "Emily, you've always been too talented to be stuck in this town. Remember when we were kids and you said that one day you'd have your own atelier? In Paris?" Paul's words awakened long-dormant memories, afternoons of shared dreams, childish promises made under the shade of the old magnolia tree in the square. He had always been her biggest encourager, even when everyone said sewing had no future. "Things changed," she replied, thinking of her grandmother, of the responsibility she carried. "Not all dreams need to take us far from home." Before Paul could respond, a familiar voice interrupted the conversation. "Good morning, Emily." Richard was approaching the booth, elegant even in casual Saturday attire. His eyes lingered for a moment on Paul, an almost imperceptible shadow crossing his face. "Richard, what a surprise!" Emily felt her heart accelerate. "This is Paul, my childhood friend." The two men greeted each other with a formal cordiality that barely disguised the underlying tension. Paul was the first to move away, but not before giving Emily a significant look. "We need to catch up," he said. "I have some interesting proposals to tell you about." After his departure, an uncomfortable silence hung in the air. Richard distractedly examined some displayed pieces, but his mind seemed distant. "I came to bring you some news," he said finally. "Not all good. Charles Montgomery, our financial director, is questioning the dress project. He thinks establishing a partnership with a local seamstress might diminish the brand's prestige." Emily felt as if something cold slid down her spine. "I understand," she replied, trying to keep her voice firm. "Maybe he's right. After all, what is my work compared to the great fashion houses?" "No," Richard's response was immediate and firm. "Your work carries something that no great fashion house can replicate. It carries history, tradition, love for the craft. That's exactly what I want to bring back to the company." Their eyes met, and Emily felt that familiar warmth spread through her chest. But along with it came a pang of insecurity. Between the shadows of the past and the uncertainties of the present, where was her true place? Paul's words echoed in her mind, mixing with the implicit promises in Richard's gaze. The studio was quiet that afternoon, except for the soft whisper of silk sliding between Emily's fingers. Aurora Morgan's dress was beginning to take shape, each stitch meticulously placed telling its own story. But Emily's mind was restless, divided between Paul's words and the situation at Morgan Textiles. The doorbell rang softly, and she looked up to find Grandma Rose returning from her daily walk to the pharmacy. Her grandmother seemed more tired than usual, and Emily quickly put down her work to help her settle into her favorite armchair. "I saw Paul in the square," commented Grandma Rose as Emily served her a cup of chamomile tea. "He told me about the proposal he intends to make to you." Emily froze, the teacup suspended in the air. "What proposal?" "He secured a space in a prestigious studio in Boston," her grandmother responded, her wise eyes studying her granddaughter's reaction. "He wants you to join him as a partner." Emily's heart leaped. Boston, the city of her teenage dreams, where possibilities seemed endless. For a moment she felt again that old restlessness, the desire to take higher flights. "But what about you?" "And our studio here?" she asked, sitting at the feet of her grandmother's armchair. Grandma Rose smiled, that smile that always made Emily feel like a little girl again. "My dear, don't let me be your anchor. Sometimes we need to release some threads to weave new patterns." Before Emily could respond, they heard footsteps on the porch. Richard appeared at the door, his countenance more serious than usual. "Sorry to come without notice," he said, "but I needed to talk to you in person." Emily felt her heart race, as always happened in his presence. Richard brought with him a document folder and an expression that mixed concern and determination. "Charles, Montgomery has called a board meeting for tomorrow," he explained, sitting on the sofa. "He wants to discuss not just my mother's dress, but the whole concept of reclaiming artisanal work in the company." "And that's bad?" asked Emily, trying to keep her voice steady. "It could be an opportunity," replied Richard, his eyes shining, "with an idea. Emily, I want to present a proposal to the board, not just for one dress, but for a complete line that recaptures the essence of your grandfather's work, a collection that unites the traditional with the contemporary." The silence that followed was filled by the ticking of the old clock and the rustling of the curtains in the afternoon breeze. Emily looked at the unfinished dress, at her grandmother's wrinkled hands, at Richard's hopeful eyes. "But for that," he continued, his voice softer, "I need you to trust me, to believe in this vision as much as I believe in your talent." "Grandma." Rose softly cleared her throat, drawing the attention of both. "Sometimes," she said with that wisdom that only years can bring, "destiny presents us with two doors, not for us to choose one, but for us to learn to build our own path." The Morgan Textiles boardroom emanated power and tradition. The immense carved wood panel behind the main table told the company's history in delicate reliefs, and portraits of former directors silently observed the scene unfolding. Emily nervously adjusted the folder she carried, feeling out of place in her most formal dress, her own creation in navy blue tweed that her grandmother had insisted she wear. Richard, seated to her right, emanated a calmness she envied. Charles Montgomery, the financial director, was the last to enter. Tall and impeccably dressed, his cold eyes assessed Emily with poorly disguised skepticism. "Gentlemen, we are here to discuss the unconventional proposal of our young director," he began, his voice cutting through the air like a razor. "Richard suggests not just an artisanal dress, but a complete line based on outdated production methods." "Traditional methods," corrected Richard, his voice firm, "the same ones that built this company's reputation." He made a gesture to Emily, who began to distribute the portfolios they had prepared together. With hands that she strived to keep steady, Emily opened her presentation. The photographs of her creations, mixed with her grandfather's original designs, told a story of tradition and innovation. "The luxury market is changing," she explained, surprising herself with the firmness of her own voice. "Customers are not just looking for brands, but stories, authenticity, connection to origins." "Connection doesn't pay bills," interrupted Montgomery. "How long does it take to produce a single piece like this? What's the cost?" Morgan Textiles is a modern company, not a museum of obsolete techniques. "My grandfather," Richard's voice cut through the air like a silent thunder, "built this company believing that quality and tradition would never be obsolete, and the numbers prove he..." was right. Richard projected a graph showing the growth of luxury brands that had returned to artisanal production. We are not proposing to abandon our current production, but to create a premium line that recaptures our essence. Emily observed the faces around the table, some thoughtful, others skeptical. Her heart was beating strongly, but there was something more beyond fear, a deep certainty that she was where she should be. "Miss Rivers," the voice of an older female director surprised her. "This embroidery on your dress, is it your work?" Emily nodded, and the woman stood up to examine the finishing more closely. "My mother had a dress with this same stitch," she commented, her eyes softening. It was her most precious piece. A murmur ran through the room. Emily felt Richard's hand lightly touch her arm, a discreet gesture of support that sent shivers through her skin. "I propose a test," Charles Montgomery finally said, his tone still skeptical but less hostile. "Mrs. Morgan's dress will be our prototype. If the result is satisfactory, we can reconsider a controlled expansion of the project." When the meeting ended, Emily felt exhausted, but strangely light. In the corridor, Richard stopped her with a gentle touch on the shoulder. "You were amazing in there," he said, his eyes shining with something more than professional admiration. "We were," she corrected, allowing herself a small smile. But her heart was restless. That morning before leaving, she had found an envelope from Paul under her door, containing the formal proposal for the studio in Boston. 2 doors were opening before her, and as her grandmother said, perhaps the challenge wasn't to choose between them, but to find her own path. The Lily Flower Cafe in downtown Fairview had been Emily's favorite place since adolescence. That Sunday afternoon, while waiting for Paul, she observed through the window the people strolling through the square, carrying their invisible stories. Sorry for the delay, Paul arrived, bringing with him the familiar aroma of his citrus cologne and memories of simpler times. He sat down in front of her with a smile she knew so well, the same smile that encouraged her when she doubted her dreams. "I brought something for you," he said, placing an elegant catalogue on the table. "The studio in Boston. We have 5. Beginning stylists, all with different but complementary visions. Your traditional technique would be the differentiator we need." Emily leafed through the catalogue, admiring the modern and bold creations. It was everything she had dreamed of years ago: innovation, experimentation, creative freedom. "It's impressive, Paul. And there's more," he continued, leaning forward with enthusiasm. "We have contacts with international buyers, Paris, Milan, all looking for something authentic, different from the mainstream." Emily's heart raced. Paris, the city that populated her teenage dreams. But before she could respond, her gaze caught a familiar figure through the window. Richard was walking through the square, absorbed in a conversation with an elegant woman she didn't know. Paul followed her gaze. "The Morgan heir," he commented with a touch of irony in his voice. "Emily, do you really think you have a future in that company? They live off dead tradition, not living innovation." "It's not quite like that," she defended, observing how Richard smiled at his companion. "They're trying to change, to find a balance between traditional and contemporary." "As you've always done," Paul took her hand on the table. "But you can do that in an environment that truly values your talent. Without ties, without corporate politics, without," he hesitated, "emotional complications." Emily gently withdrew her hand, feeling her face warm. "I don't know what you're talking about. I know I'm no longer that boy who dreamed beside you," Paul continued, his voice softer. "But I still know you, Emily. I see how you look at him and how he looks at you. But I also see the world to which he belongs." Through the window, Emily observed Richard and his companion enter an antique store. Her heart grew heavy. Even as her mind told her she had no right to this type of feeling. "I need to think," she said finally, standing up. "About everything." "The studio opens in 2 months," replied Paul, also standing, "but we need an answer in 2 weeks to organize everything." On her way home, Emily stopped in the square, sitting on the bench under the old magnolia tree. The late afternoon sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, while her hands unconsciously caressed the fabric of her dress, one of the first she had made alone, using the stitches her grandmother had taught her. A gentle breeze brought the scent of flowers from the municipal garden, mixed with the aroma of fresh bread from the nearby bakery. It was the smell of home, of memories, of belonging, but it was also the smell of comfort, of accommodation. Had the time come to leave all this behind? Aurora Morgan's dress was almost ready. Emily was working on the last details of the embroidery when Richard arrived at the studio, bringing with him an old cardboard box. His expression was different from usual. There was a mixture of anxiety and expectation in his eyes. "I found this in the company's old archive," he explained carefully, placing the box on the table. "I think you need to see it." Inside the box, yellowed by time, were dozens of drawings, newspaper clippings, and photographs. Emily immediately recognized her grandfather's trace in the sketches, but there was something more. Annotations in the margins, correspondence, exchanges, detailed plans for a company expansion that never happened. "Your grandfather and mine weren't just partners," said Richard, his voice soft. "They had a joint dream. They wanted to create a school of artisans, a center of excellence in traditional techniques." Emily picked up a photograph where the two men appeared in front of an old warehouse. On the back of the photo, a note. "Future, School of Textile Arts, Fairview, 1975. "What happened?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. Richard sighed, sitting beside her. Charles Montgomery was young at the time, but already working in the company. He convinced the board that a school would be a waste of resources, that the future was in large-scale production. "And your grandfather agreed. He was traveling when the decision was made. When he returned..." Richard hesitated. "It was too late. Your grandfather had already been removed, and the school project was shelved." Emily felt tears forming in her eyes, not just for the injustice of the past, but for the irony of the present. And now Montgomery tries to do the same, prevent the company from returning to its roots. "I won't let that happen." Richard's voice was loaded with determination. "Emily, that warehouse still exists. It's abandoned, but the structure is intact, and I have a plan." He took his folder, removing a set of documents. "I don't just want a line of artisanal clothes. I want to realize our grandfather's dream, a school of textile arts, a training center for new generations of artisans." Emily's heart raced. It was a dream bigger than anything she had ever imagined, even bigger than Paris. "But Montgomery..." "I already have the support of part of the board," interrupted Richard. "But I need you, not just for your talent, but because..." He hesitated, his eyes meeting hers. "Because you reminded me why I fell in love with this business in the first place." The silence that followed was loaded with unspoken meanings. Emily looked at the unfinished dress, at her grandfather's drawings, at Richard's face so close to hers. Somewhere in the house, she heard her grandmother softly humming while knitting. "The woman who was with you yesterday," the words escaped before she could contain them, "in the square." A knowing smile illuminated Richard's face. "My cousin Bethany. She's an architect. She came to evaluate the warehouse for the school project." Emily felt her face burn, partly from shame for her insecurity, partly from relief. Richard moved a little closer, his perfume mixing with the smell of new fabrics and old memories. "Emily," his voice was almost a whisper, "I know you have other proposals, other dreams, but I believe we can build something special here, something that honors the past and opens paths to the future." Their gazes met, and in that moment, all of Emily's doubts seemed to silence. The future was there, between the lines of a story that had begun long before her, waiting to be embroidered with her own stitches. The old Morgan Textiles warehouse was located on the outskirts of Fairview, surrounded by a long abandoned garden where wild roses grew freely. Emily followed Richard through the stone-covered path, her heart beating harder with each step. Bethany, the architect cousin, awaited them at the entrance, her plans and projects organized on an improvised table. "It's bigger than it appears." "In the old photographs," commented Emily, observing the high windows and the imposing structure that, despite years of abandonment, maintained its dignity. "And more beautiful," added Bethany, her eyes shining with professional enthusiasm. "The industrial architecture of the 70s has a unique elegance. Look at these Art Deco details on the door jambs." Richard opened the heavy doors, and sunlight invaded the space, revealing old sewing machines covered by dusty sheets. The smell of old wood and dormant memories filled the air. "This would be the main teaching area," explained Bethany, unrolling a blueprint on the table. "We can preserve some of these old machines as part of the textile museum that Richard wants to create." In the mezzanine, Emily walked through the space, her fingers sliding over an old cutting table. She could almost see her grandfather there, teaching the secrets of the craft to apprentices, sharing not just techniques, but also love for the art of sewing. "And this area?" she asked, pointing to a circular space near the windows. "The main studio," replied Richard, approaching. "I thought you could coordinate it, a space where tradition and innovation could freely dialogue." Emily felt her heart leap. The natural light that entered through the windows created a perfect environment for working with fabrics, and the view to the abandoned garden had a wild beauty that inspired creativity. "The roses," she murmured, looking through the windows. "My grandmother always said her favorite garden was near the old Morgan Textiles warehouse." "They were your grandfather's," Richard revealed softly. "He planted them when they started building the school. He said a place of learning needed to have beauty around it." Bethany discreetly moved away, leaving them alone while pretending to take measurements. Emily felt her eyes sting with contained tears. "Sometimes," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I'm afraid I'm not up to this dream, that I can't honor this legacy." Richard took her hand, a gesture so natural it made her heart race. "Emily, you're already honoring this legacy. Each stitch you make, each piece you create, each story you preserve through your work." Their gazes met, and for a moment time seemed suspended. The afternoon sun streamed through the dusty windows, creating a golden halo around them. Emily could feel the warmth of Richard's hand in hers, the energy of the space around them, the weight of history and the promise of the future. "I'll need help," she said finally, a smile forming on her lips. "To transform this dream into reality. We're in this together," he replied, his thumb gently caressing her hand, "as our grandfathers should have been." The sound of footsteps made them gently separate. Charles Montgomery appeared at the door, his dark figure contrasting with the sunlight. His face was a mask of poorly disguised disapproval. "So this is where you intend to bury the company's money," he said, his voice echoing through the empty space. "In an outdated dream." Emily felt Richard tense beside her, but before he could respond, she stepped forward. Fear had given way to a deep certainty, born from love for her craft and connection to her history. "Mr. Montgomery," Emily's voice was firm, despite her racing heart. "Have you entered a Morgan textile store lately? Have you observed how people look at the pieces?" She walked to one of the old machines, removing the sheet that covered it. "They look at the labels for the story behind the clothing. They want to know who made it, how it was made, what is the meaning of each piece." "Sentimentality that doesn't pay the bills," retorted Montgomery, but something in his posture had changed. On the contrary, Emily took her folder, which she had brought to show the projects to Bethany. "Here are the numbers of the main luxury brands that have invested in artisanal programs in recent years. The profits haven't just increased, but customer loyalty has as well." Richard approached, his presence giving strength to Emily. "Charles, you were in the company when my grandfather and Mr. Anthony dreamed of this school. You more than anyone know the potential that was here." "Different times," responded Montgomery, but his voice was less cutting. "The market has changed." "Yes, it has changed," agreed Emily. "It has changed in favor of the authentic, the artisanal, the meaningful. People are tired of the disposable, the mass-produced." She opened Aurora's dress designs on the cutting table. "Each stitch here tells a story. Each finish carries a tradition. This isn't just about making clothes. It's about preserving knowledge, creating connections, building a legacy." Montgomery approached, observing the designs with critical eyes. For a moment, his mask of business coldness seemed to crack, revealing something more human underneath. "I was there, you know," he said finally, his voice softer. "When your grandfather left, I saw how it affected the company, how we lost something more than just an employee." "Then help us recover that," intervened Richard. We're not proposing to abandon the current production, but to create something complementary, something that can inspire the next generation. Bethany approached with her plans. The project is economically viable, she explained. We can do it in phases, start with a pilot program. A thoughtful silence filled the warehouse. The sunlight was beginning to change, creating elongated shadows on the wooden floor. Through the windows, the wild roses danced in the afternoon breeze, silent witnesses to another decisive moment in that space. "Aurora will love the dress," said Montgomery finally, a small smile appearing on his lips. "She always spoke of your grandfather's talent." Emily felt Richard discreetly take her hand, their fingers intertwining like the threads of a well-woven fabric. "I'll need a detailed business plan," continued Montgomery, his tone returning to his usual professionalism, but without the old hostility. "And a realistic implementation schedule." When he left, Emily released the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Richard pulled her into a spontaneous embrace, and she allowed herself to melt in his arms, feeling the subtle scent of his cologne mixed with the smell of old wood from the warehouse. "You were amazing," he whispered in her ear, making her tremble slightly. Bethany delicately cleared her throat, a knowing smile on her face. "I'll leave you to finish reconnoitering the space," she said, collecting her plans. "Tomorrow I'll bring the revised projects." Alone in the warehouse, with the golden light of late afternoon streaming through the windows, Emily and Richard remained embraced, their hearts beating in the same rhythm like the soft sound of an old sewing machine in full work. Night had already fallen over Fairview when Emily returned home. She found Paul sitting on the steps of the porch, an envelope in his hands and a serious expression on his face. "You didn't show up for afternoon coffee," he said, standing up. "I imagined you were busy with your project at the textile company." Emily felt a tightness in her chest. With all the events at the warehouse, she had completely forgotten about the meeting scheduled with Paul to discuss the final details of the Boston proposal. "I'm sorry," she replied, sitting beside him on the steps. The aroma of dahlias from the garden hung in the night air, mixing with the memories of a friendship that had spanned years. "I saw you today," continued Paul, his voice controlled. "At the old warehouse with him." Emily closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the choices she needed to make. "Paul, You don't need to explain," he gently interrupted her. "I saw how you looked at that place, how your eyes shined while you were talking. It's the same shine you had when we were children, and you talked about your dreams of being a designer." Inside the house, they could hear Grandma Rose talking on the phone, her cheerful voice echoing through the open windows. The familiar sound brought tears to Emily's eyes. "I always imagined that your dreams would take you far from here," continued Paul. "That one day we would be together in Boston or Paris, conquering the fashion world. But now I see that perhaps your dreams have grown deeper roots than I imagined." "They're not just my dreams now," replied Emily, her voice choked. "They're my grandfather's dreams, my grandmother's, of all the people who kept this tradition alive, and they're dreams that can make a difference here, in our town." Paul took her hand, squeezing it gently. "And Richard, is he part of these dreams too?" Emily felt her face warm but didn't look away. "He makes me believe that it's possible to unite past and future, tradition and innovation, that I don't need to choose between being an artisan and being an artist." "Like your grandfather tried to do," Paul smiled sadly. "You know, when you told me his story years ago, I thought it was an example of what not to do, getting stuck in a small town with small dreams. But now I understand that perhaps his dreams weren't too small. Perhaps the world just wasn't ready for them at the time." A gentle breeze stirred the leaves of the jasmine that covered the porch, bringing its sweet perfume. Emily looked at the stars that were beginning to dot the dark sky. "The studio in Boston would be amazing," she said finally. "And working with you, reviving our teenage dreams. But it wouldn't be true. It wouldn't be me." Paul stood up, extending the envelope to her. "Keep this," he said, "not as a proposal, but as a reminder that your dreams were always big enough to fly. You just chose to give them roots first." He leaned down, gently kissing her forehead as he did when they were children. "Be happy, Emily. And when the school is running, don't forget to reserve a spot for an old friend who still has a lot to learn about the value of tradition." Emily hugged him tightly, smelling the familiar scent of his citrus cologne, the warmth of a friendship that she now realized didn't need to be lost just because their paths were taking different directions. When Paul left, she remained on the porch, the envelope in her hands and her heart lighter. Grandma Rose appeared at the door, bringing 2 cups of chamomile tea. "Heart's choices," said the grandmother softly, sitting beside her, "are the only ones that don't make us regret, even when the path is more difficult." Aurora Morgan's dress rested on the mannequin like a living work of art. Emily was putting the final stitches on the hem embroidery, each movement of her needle precise and full of meaning. The deep blue of the fabric seemed to capture all the history that had brought them to this point, the dreams of the past, the promises of the present, the possibilities of the future. Richard arrived without notice, as had become his custom. In recent weeks, he brought with him a small package wrapped in tissue paper. "I finished the embroidery on the left sleeve," said Emily, without taking her eyes off her work. "Now all that's left is—" Her words were interrupted when she saw what Richard was taking from the package, a delicate golden brooch in the shape of scissors, studded with small pearls. "It was your grandfather's," he explained, approaching. "My grandfather kept it all these years, waiting for the right moment to return it. I think that moment has come." Emily took the brooch with trembling hands. She remembered it from the old photographs her grandmother kept, always on her grandfather's lapel on special occasions. "How did your grandfather manage to preserve so many memories?" she asked, her voice choked with emotion. Richard smiled, that smile that always made her heart race. He never lost hope that one day things would return to their place. He kept everything in a special room in his house, drawings, tools, photographs. He said they were seeds that would one day bloom again. Grandma Rose entered the room at that moment, her eyes immediately recognizing the brooch. "Anthony wore this on the day of our wedding," she said, approaching to touch the jewel with delicate fingers. "He said it was his lucky charm. And now," continued Richard, taking the brooch from Emily's hands and gently pinning it to the dress on the mannequin, "it will bring luck to a new beginning." The brooch glinted against the blue fabric, like a star captured in gold. Emily felt tears escaping from her eyes, but they were tears of joy, of fulfillment, of love. "The dress is ready," she said finally, taking a step back to admire the complete piece. It was more than a dress. It was a story told in fabric and thread, in memory and hope. "It's perfect," murmured Richard, but his eyes weren't on the dress. They were fixed on Emily with an intensity that made her heart leap. "I'll make some tea for us," said Grandma Rose, with a knowing smile on her lips. Before leaving, she stopped at the door and looked back. "Did you know that's how I met your grandfather, Richard? He had come to bring a brooch very similar to this one to my mother, who was also a seamstress." When they were alone, the silence between them was charged with unspoken words, with feelings that had grown like the roses in the warehouse garden, wild, inevitable, true. "Emily," began Richard, his voice softer than the whisper of silk, "I didn't come here just for the dress." He approached, taking her hands in his. Emily could feel the warmth of his touch, the gentle tremor of his fingers, the weight of the moment unfolding between them. "When I started this project, I was looking for a way to honor the company's legacy, to recover something we had lost, but I found much more than that. I found you." Where I left off, Richard and Emily were having a moment in her studio after he gave her a family brooch that belonged to her grandfather. I'll continue translating the story from where I left off, maintaining the same style and tone, and keeping the American setting and character names. The Morgan mansion gleamed under the party lights. Emily observed the movement of the guests through the waiting room window, where Aurora was finishing getting ready. The blue dress, her most important creation so far, fell perfectly on the elegant figure of the birthday celebrant. "It's like reliving a dream," said Aurora, admiring herself in the mirror. Her fingers delicately touched the embroidery, recognizing the stitches that were once Anthony Rivers' signature. "Your grandfather would have been proud." Emily adjusted the golden brooch at Aurora's shoulder, her hands trembling slightly. "Did you know my grandfather well?" "Darling, he designed my wedding dress," replied Aurora, her eyes shining with memories. "In those days, the textile company was more than a business, it was a family. And today, seeing you here, it's as if the circle has finally completed." A gentle knock on the door interrupted the conversation. Grandma Rose entered, elegant in a moss-green dress that Emily had made especially for the occasion. Seeing Aurora in the blue dress, her eyes filled with tears. "Rose, my friend." Aurora opened her arms, and the two ladies embraced, decades of shared history flowing between them. "It's exactly as I imagined," said Grandma Rose, adjusting an invisible detail on the dress. Emily managed to capture the essence of Anthony's work, but with her own touch. The music from the party arrived softly through the windows, mixing with the murmur of guests in the garden. Emily knew that among them were the most important names in national fashion, including Marcel Dubois, the famous fashion critic known for his sharp tongue. "Don't let them intimidate you," said Aurora, noticing her apprehension. "You have something that many of them have lost along the way: authenticity." When they descended to the party, Emily felt all eyes turn to them. Aurora was a vision in midnight blue, the dress capturing the light from the chandeliers like water under moonlight. Richard, who was conversing with some guests, stopped mid-sentence upon seeing them, his gaze meeting Emily's with an intensity that made her heart race. "Magnificent," Marcel Dubois' voice cut the moment. The critic circled Aurora, examining every detail of the dress with clinical eyes. "But certainly not a creation of the current Morgan textiles. This type of artisanal work no longer exists." "On the contrary," intervened Richard, approaching. "This dress represents exactly the future of Morgan textiles. It was created by Emily Rivers, granddaughter of Anthony Rivers, one of the founders of our artisanal tradition." A murmur of recognition ran through the group. Aurora smiled, turning gently to show the details of the dress. "And it's not just a dress," she continued. "It's the first step of a new project. Richard, dear, I think this is the perfect moment for the announcement." Richard picked up a champagne flute, signaling for the waiters to serve all the guests. His arm lightly brushed Emily's when he positioned himself beside her, sending shivers through her skin. "Ladies and gentlemen," his clear voice carried a mixture of pride and emotion, "today we celebrate not only my mother's birthday, we also celebrate the rebirth of a dream that began almost 50 years ago." Emily felt her grandmother's hand find hers, gently squeezing it. Across the room, she saw Charles Montgomery discreetly nod in her direction, a small smile on his lips. The moment she had feared so much had arrived, but now, surrounded by all those people who were part of her history, she felt only peace and certainty. "And it is with great joy that we announce the creation of the Anthony Rivers School of Textile Arts," concluded Richard, his voice laden with emotion. "A center of excellence that will unite artisanal tradition with contemporary innovation, under the creative direction of Emily Rivers." Applause filled the room, but Emily barely heard it. Her heart was beating strongly as she observed the reactions around her: her grandmother's proud smile, Aurora's silent tears, Richard's intense gaze. Marcel Dubois was the first to speak after the announcement. "A school of craftsmanship? In the countryside?" His tone was skeptical, but there was a gleam of interest in his eyes. "And how do you intend to compete with the traditional schools of Paris and Milan?" "We don't intend to compete," replied Emily, surprising herself with the firmness of her voice. "We intend to complement. There are unique stories and techniques here that deserve to be preserved and renewed." She gestured toward Aurora's dress. "Each stitch in this dress carries a tradition passed down through generations. It's not just about making beautiful clothes. It's about keeping alive an art that connects people and stories. And about creating opportunities," added Richard. "The school will offer scholarships for young talents from disadvantaged communities. We want to train not just artisans, but guardians of a living tradition." Bethany approached with the architectural plans, which were placed on an easel nearby. The guests gathered to see the images of the old warehouse transformed into a modern teaching center, maintaining its historical elements. "The project is ambitious," commented one of the company directors, "but the timing couldn't be better. The market is increasingly valuing the artisanal, the authentic." Emily was observing the movement when she felt Richard gently touch her arm. "Come with me," he whispered. "I want to show you something." They discreetly escaped to the garden, where the landscaped roses mingled with the fragrance of the night. Richard led her to a small gazebo illuminated by lanterns. "Are you happy?" he asked, his eyes searching for hers in the soft light. "More than happy," replied Emily. "It's as if all the loose threads of my life were finally coming together in a pattern that makes sense." Richard smiled, taking her hands in his. "When I started looking for someone to make my mother's dress, I had no idea I would find so much more. I found not just a partner to realize our grandfather's dream, but someone who made me rediscover the true meaning of our work." Emily felt her heart accelerate. The music from the party reached them softly, creating a bubble of intimacy in the night garden. "You know," he continued, his voice softer, "my grandfather always said that the best fabrics are made of threads that intertwine naturally, as if they were destined to meet." Their faces were very close now, and Emily could smell the subtle scent of his cologne mixed with the aroma of roses. The lanterns cast dancing shadows on their faces, and the world seemed to have reduced to that moment, to that space between them. "Emily," whispered Richard, one of his hands rising to touch her face, "I think our threads were destined to meet, too." And there, under the starry sky of Fairview, surrounded by the scent of roses and the distant sound of celebration, their lips met in a kiss that seemed stitched by the threads of destiny itself. The months that followed passed like a feverish dream of activity. The old Morgan Textiles warehouse gradually transformed under Bethany's watchful supervision. The walls were restored, maintaining their original characteristics, while modern equipment arrived to complement the carefully recovered old sewing machines. Emily divided her time between planning the school and her small studio, where she continued serving her faithful clients from Fairview. On a particularly busy afternoon, while organizing the curriculum for the basic sewing course, she received an unexpected visit. "I thought you might like to see this," said Charles Montgomery, placing an old folder on her table. "I found it in the company archives. It's the original project for the school, written by your grandfather and August Morgan." With trembling hands, Emily opened the folder. The yellowed pages contained not just technical plans, but a complete vision of what the school could be, a place where tradition and innovation would dance together, where each student would be more than an apprentice, would be a guardian of stories. "They thought of everything," she murmured, passing her fingers over her grandfather's familiar handwriting. "Even a program for exchanges with artisans from different regions. And now you can realize all of this," replied Montgomery, a soft smile on his usually serious face. "You know, I've been observing your work over the last few months. You have the same gleam in your eyes that your grandfather had when he talked about the school." The conversation was interrupted by Richard's arrival, who brought with him a surprise: the first school uniforms created from one of the designs found in the folder. The navy blue fabric with golden details carried a timeless elegance. "They're perfect," said Emily, touching the delicate embroidery of the logo, scissors intertwined with a flower, symbolizing the union between technique and art. "And we already have our first complete class," announced Richard, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. 20 students, including 5 scholarship recipients from disadvantaged communities." Emily felt her heart overflow. The dream was no longer just hers, or her grandfather's. It had transformed into something greater, something that could change lives. That night, as they walked through the warehouse garden, where the old roses bloomed with renewed vigor, Richard surprised Emily with another revelation. "Marcel Dubois published an article about the project," he said, showing her a fashion magazine. "He calls the school a beacon of authenticity in a world of mass production." Emily read the article, moved to see how the critic, previously so skeptical, now praised the initiative to preserve and renew artisanal techniques. But one phrase, in particular, caught her attention: In Fairview, a young seamstress not only honors her grandfather's legacy, but weaves a new future for American craftsmanship. "It's funny," she said, leaning against Richard's chest as they watched the sunset through the restored windows of the warehouse. "I always thought I would need to leave here to realize my dreams, but sometimes the greatest dreams are those that make us return to our roots." Richard embraced her from behind, his chin resting gently on her shoulder. "And sometimes," he murmured, "the most important dreams are those we share with others." The distant sound of sewing machines came from the studio, where some students were working overtime practicing their stitches. Emily closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of Richard's embrace, the scent of roses in the air, the soft weight of her grandfather's brooch that she now always wore on her lapel. Each element seemed like a stitch carefully placed in the fabric of her life, creating a pattern more beautiful than any she could have imagined alone. The inauguration of the Anthony Rivers School of Textile Arts was scheduled for a week away, but Emily had a special surprise planned beforehand. With the help of Grandma Rose and Aurora, she organized a small exhibition in the restored warehouse, gathering historical pieces from Morgan textiles and creations by her grandfather that had been preserved over the years. "Each piece tells a story," she explained to Richard as they organized the mannequins. A wedding dress from 1975 with delicate handmade lace, a men's suit with subtle embroidery that revealed her grandfather's unique signature, Aurora's blue dress itself, now a permanent part of the school's collection. "And this," said Aurora, bringing an old box, "is a very special piece that I kept all these years." Inside the box, carefully preserved, was an ivory silk dress with a delicate embroidery of flowers rising up the side. Emily immediately recognized the model from her grandmother's old photographs. "Your wedding dress," she whispered, touching the fabric with reverence. "The first dress your grandfather made for me," confirmed Grandma Rose, her eyes shining with memories. "He spent nights awake working on the embroidery, saying that each flower represented a moment in our history." Emily examined the meticulous work, recognizing stitches that she herself had learned over the years. "It's amazing how these stitches have survived time," she commented, "as if each one kept a piece of memory. And now," said Richard, taking her hand, "we're going to create new memories." That afternoon, as the sun began to set, a special group visited the exhibition, the 20 students of the school's first class. Emily watched, moved, as they examined each piece with admiration and respect, asking questions, taking notes, absorbing not just techniques but stories. A young scholarship student approached Grandma Rose's wedding dress, her eyes shining with fascination. "How did he manage to make such small and perfect stitches?" she asked. "With love," replied Grandma Rose, approaching, "and a lot of practice. Would you like me to show you?" Soon the lady was sitting with the young girl at one of the restored work tables, patiently demonstrating the invisible stitch technique. Other students approached, forming an attentive circle around them. Emily felt her eyes fill with tears as she observed the scene. There was the true spirit of the school, not just the transmission of techniques, but the preservation of a living tradition, passed from generation to generation with care and dedication. "Are you emotional?" asked Richard, embracing her around the waist. "I'm happy," she replied, leaning into him. "It's as if I could feel my grandfather here, seeing his dream come to life in a way he never imagined." Across the room, Aurora was animatedly conversing with Charles Montgomery, showing him details of an old Morgan Textiles blazer. The financial director, who had previously been so skeptical, now seemed genuinely interested, making notes in his agenda. "You know," said Richard, his voice soft near Emily's ear, "there's an old tradition in my family. When a Morgan finds his true love, he presents the loved one with something that belonged to previous generations." Emily felt her heart race when Richard took a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside was a delicate gold ring with a small scissors in relief, the same symbol that now decorated the school's uniform. Emily adjusted the dress she had created, especially for the occasion, a model in navy blue silk with golden details that echoed the design of the school uniforms. The ring with the small scissors in relief shone on her right hand, while her grandfather's brooch adorned her lapel. "It's perfect," said Grandma Rose, entering Emily's bedroom. Her grandmother wore an outfit they had created together, each stitch carrying shared memories. "Your grandfather used to say that the best dresses are those that tell a story." "And what story does this dress tell, Grandma?" "The story of a girl who became a woman without losing her dreams," replied the elderly lady, affectionately adjusting a lock of her granddaughter's hair. "And who discovered that sometimes the most beautiful dreams are those we share." The warehouse was full when they arrived. Local authorities, press representatives, important figures from the fashion world, all had come to witness the rebirth of a dream. But for Emily, the most important presence was the 20 students from the first class, all proudly wearing their navy blue uniforms. Richard waited for her on the small improvised stage, elegant in his dark suit. Beside him, Aurora and Charles. Montgomery conversed with Marcel Dubois, who had returned especially to cover the inauguration. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard began, his clear voice echoing through the space. "Today we're not just inaugurating a school, we're inaugurating a dream that began almost 50 years ago, when two visionary men believed that the art of sewing was more than a craft. It was a way to preserve history, culture, and beauty." Emily observed the audience as Richard spoke. She saw Paul among the guests, smiling proudly. She saw her old clients from the fair, some with tears in their eyes. She saw Bethany, who had transformed the architectural project into reality. "And now," continued Richard, "I'd like to call to the stage the person who gave new life to this dream. Emily Rivers hasn't just honored her grandfather's legacy, she's transformed it into something even greater." Climbing onto the stage, Emily felt the weight of the moment, the intertwining of so many stories reaching a crucial point. The ring on her hand caught the light, reminding her of the silent promise she had made the night before, when Richard had placed it on her finger. "The Anthony Rivers School of Textile Arts," she said, her voice firm despite the emotion, "is born from love for the craft of sewing. But more than that, it's born from the belief that each stitch, each fabric, each creation carries within it a story that deserves to be preserved and continued." The words flowed naturally as she spoke about the courses, the scholarships, the plans for the future. But it was when she looked at the young faces of her first students that she truly felt the meaning of it all. "My grandfather used to say that sewing is like weaving destinies," she concluded. "Each stitch connects us to the past, while moving us toward the future. And here in this school, we'll continue weaving this story together." When the doors officially opened and guests began exploring the facilities, Emily remained on the stage for a moment, absorbing the scene. The old warehouse had transformed into a bright and welcoming space, where old and modern machines coexisted harmoniously, where past and future met in every detail. 1 year had passed since the inauguration of the school. The rose garden now bloomed with full vigor, its vibrant colors framing the path to the building's entrance. Emily walked among the flowers, distractedly adjusting her wedding dress, a creation she had developed over the past few months, incorporating elements from her grandmother's dress and techniques learned with her students. The small studio where everything began now served as a space for advanced practical classes, and it was there that Grandma Rose frequently shared her stories and knowledge with new generations of seamstresses. The old armchair where she used to knit still occupied its special place by the window, a silent witness to so many transformations. "Are you ready?" asked Aurora, entering the studio. She carried in her hands a small bouquet of roses from the garden, tied with a navy blue silk ribbon, the same color that had become the symbol of the school. "Almost," replied Emily, her fingers touching the golden brooch that had belonged to her grandfather. Just one detail left. Grandma Rose approached with a small box. Inside was a delicate lace veil, yellowed by time, but still extraordinarily beautiful. "It was mine," she explained, "and before that, it was your great-grandmother's. Each bride in the family added a small embroidery." With hands trembling with emotion, Emily examined the different stitches and styles that told the story of the women in her family. In one corner, she found space to add her own touch, a small embroidery of scissors intertwined with a rose, symbols that now represented not just her personal history, but the entire legacy she had helped build. The wedding would be held in the school's garden, where white chairs had been arranged among the rose bushes. Guests were already beginning to arrive: her students, former clients from the fair, friends who had been part of her journey. Paul was there with his new partner from the Boston studio, having become a frequent collaborator in exchange projects with the school. Before walking to the improvised altar, Emily paused for a moment at the entrance of the warehouse. Through the restored windows, she could see the sewing machines lined up, some old, some new, all carrying stories and promises. On the wall, an enlarged photograph showed her grandfather and August Morgan young, smiling in front of that same warehouse. "They would be proud," said Richard, quietly approaching from behind her. Technically, the groom shouldn't see the bride before the ceremony, but some traditions could be adapted. "You shouldn't be here," she teased, but made no move to leave. "I couldn't help it," he replied, his eyes shining with love and admiration. "Besides, I think our grandfathers would approve of this stolen moment." Emily turned to face him, her heart overflowing with emotion. "You know, for a long time I thought that realizing my dreams meant leaving, seeking something bigger in distant places. But now I understand that sometimes the greatest dreams are those that make us create deeper roots." Richard smiled, taking her hands in his. "And sometimes," he completed, "the most beautiful dreams are those we build together, stitch by stitch, day by day." The sound of music beginning to play called them back to the present moment. It was time to start another chapter of their story. Emily took one last look at the warehouse, at her grandfather's portrait, at the sewing machines awaiting the next day of classes. As she walked toward the altar, her family veil dancing softly in the breeze perfumed by roses, Emily felt that each step was like a stitch carefully placed in the fabric of her life, precise, meaningful, full of love and purpose. The future unfolded before her like a new fabric, ready to receive the embroidery that she and Richard would create together.